morning, good afternoon, good evening. The land issue is one of Zimbabwe's number one unfinished business. The chaotic, corrupt way that Zanu PF carried out his so-called land redistribution not only failed to address a number of key issues, but also made Zimbabwe's economic collapse, accelerated it at the very least, if not caused it. Because when the agriculture sector collapsed following the seizure of the farms starting in 2000, the economy collapse followed. And it's never recovered ever since. So Zimbabwe's land issue is a very important issue. Second only to Zimbabwe's political problem, because I don't think we can solve anything in Zimbabwe without first addressing the political issue, i.e. holding free, fair, and credible elections so that all those in positions of power and authority are accountable, democratically accountable to the people. And those democratically accountable leaders will have to address the economic issues. And at the front of that is the land issue. Let's just listen to this video clip of Eddie Cross giving an interview on the land issue and some of the issues that he brings up, and then we'll discuss it.
And under late former President Robert Mugabe, the farmers will reportedly get a total of $3.5 billion, which will be paid in installments. The first $20 million is supposed to be disbursed before the end of October. According to the government, this is part of a broader effort to revive the country's agricultural sector. I'm now joined by Eddie Cross, economist and a former member of the National Assembly of Zimbabwe. Eddie, very good afternoon to you. Thanks very much for your time. Would you say that what happened here, the farms situation, was solely responsible for the collapse of the country's agricultural sector?
Very much so. There's no doubt about that. I think the government of the day at that time expected that simply changing the ownership of the farms would not interfere with agricultural production, but in fact, it led to a complete collapse of not just commercial agriculture, but also agriculture throughout the economy. The small-scale sector in the informal economy the output fell by as much as the formal sector when this program was implemented back in 2000.
What did the people who got to get the farms actually do, or should I say, not do?
Well, there were, at the end of the process, we were left with about 300 white farmers still on their properties. Why they were selected for special treatment, I have no idea. But I suspect it was collaboration with the authorities in their areas. And then there were about of the 4,800 white farmers who were dispossessed at that time, the great majority were farming in the north of the country, and the farms where they were taken over, around about 8 million hectares, were divided into about 180,000 properties. And these were classified into two categories, A1 and A2 settlers. A2 settlers were limited to about 500 hectares and A1 settlers to about 10. And as a consequence of that, we saw very large areas of the agricultural sector were in fact abandoned, mainly because the new occupants of these properties simply had no idea what to do.
But did those who kept their farm, whether they were collaborators or whatever, do better than those who took over the farms from the white settlers who were?
Oh yes, by and large, the farmers who remained farming were able to maintain output on their farms, and that included the agribusiness sector. The agribusiness sector was not substantially affected by this program. The program was largely politically driven because the white farmers had supported the opposition back in 2000. And they wanted to, a bit like the Russian kulaks under Stalin in 1933 in the Soviet Union, where they were independent farmers who were wiped out by the then regime. Mugabe had exactly the same objective. The agribusiness sector, very large commercial industrial farms, Triangle, Hippo, Northern Estates, these farms were largely left alone and were able to continue farming without interruption. The only thing they lost was their title rights. They were not able to use their land as collateral for bank borrowing.
I mean, if one looks at the country's external debt, which amounts to $12 billion, one wonders whether the compensation that people are going to receive is in fact affordable. Can the country afford what is being promised here?
Well, our national debt, in fact, is 21 billion. It's not 12 billion. It's 21 billion. Of that, about 12 is owed to foreign creditors, and 9 is owed to domestic creditors. It's not a great deal of money. In fact, it's probably about 40% of our GDP. So we are relatively underborrowed as a country. The national debt is not really the problem. The problem is that we're in arrears, we've not been servicing it, we're subject to penalty interest rates and all sorts of other things related to that. And the threat.
Ben, what do you think?
Good day to you and good day to all viewers. Thank you for joining us. You know, I'm glad we actually had a chance to actually go into the in-depth of the whole land reform program or land redistribution program. Well, my take is, you know, every time when there is, you know, disgruntlement and, you know, unsettlement within Zanu PF ranks, Zanu PF, you know, the top brass, they bribe themselves out of the situations, if I may say. And we have seen this over, you know, and over again, where, you know, where there's unrest, and, you know, when the war veterans were not happy with the situation within, you know, Zanu PF, they were given, you know, $50,000, you know, dollars to hush hush. Recently, to the most recent, where they again were not happy with the situation, and they were given title deeds, 2 or 3 bedroomed houses, and a bicycle on top of that. You know, all these things are just rush decisions. And this is the same thing with what happened with the fast track reform program. ZANU PF needed to take the attention away from them, and they found the perfect, you know, solution. Let them go and fight each other for the what? For that land. And this is why you find it became so chaotic, violent. Many people were killed. The white people, that is, as the war veterans led, the whole land reform program. But again, we still have the question to say, who actually benefited from that land? And you will find out that it is anybody or everybody that has to do with Zanu PF top brass. If you were well connected and you were well up there, you had a stake, of the finest choice of farms, the farms with the farmhouse and so forth. You know, it didn't really benefit the people. Let's say the truth. It was just chaotic, and up to this day, some guys took vast lands, 3, 4, 5 farms for oneself, and yet the rest of the people, the actual Zimbabweans, which is you and I, we never got anything. In fact, some lost land from that, who are actually Zimbabweans themselves, black Zimbabweans, that is.
Well, one of the unfortunate realities of that land redistribution is that most of the seized farms went to the Zanu PF ruling elite. Here is President Emerson Mnangagwa standing or showing off one of his farms. As one can see there, it stretches right to the horizon. It's amazing. Some of these people have got really, really big farms. And some of them, like Ben said, multiple farms. And the truth of the matter is, most of these Zanu PF ruling elite, they got the farms, but they had no skill or interest in the farming itself. It was just an asset. And so they failed to put it to good use. And that's why agricultural production fell. And another aspect is that people like Mnangagwa there, you'll find as part of the ruling elite, they were given very generous loans, supposedly to help them in farming. And some of those people never repaid any of those loans. So while the country was losing because the land was not being to put use, the beneficiaries of those farms were gaining, in the sense that now they had another opportunity to dip, to loot. Even after Mugabe went away, because Mugabe was responsible for some of these loans and so forth, Mnangagwa, when he took over, he too had command agriculture. And the essence of command agriculture was to give those with the right connection a lot of money, it be it for seed, for fertilizers, or for equipment. And that money was never, if at all, fully accounted for. So the whole issue of the land became another opportunity for the ruling elite to loot. And meanwhile, the rural people who were supposedly supposed to benefit from the land redistribution, because the regime insisted that land was being taken away from the whites to give it to the landless peasants, remained in the rural areas. And worst of all, they were never allowed to have title deeds even to those few acres where their mud hut is built. So these are some of the big issues on the land issue that must be addressed, particularly the issue of giving title deeds to the rural areas. There is no doubt that if the people in the rural areas were given title deeds to the land, even if it be just 1 acre or a few acres, the yard on which their mud hut is built, it will give them the confidence to build a more decent house and improve those 2 acres by planting fruit trees, digging wells for clean water, and so forth. But Zanu PF has consistently refused to give people title deeds for fear that if they were to get on the economic ladder, if they were economically empowered, the next thing these people would be demanding is political empowerment. That is the one thing Zanu PF is scared of. Zanu PF does not want the rural people to be politically empowered. And so the regime is deliberately keeping them poor for its own selfish political ends. Ironically, this was the same policy of Ian Smith's white regime. He too refused to give the rural people title deeds for the same reason. Ben.
I mean, if we were to really ask the question, what was the land reform program for and who was it for? You know, a classic and most disgusting example can come up, which is Bona Mugabe, the daughter of the late Robert Mugabe, who, in her divorce settlement, the husband was claiming a share of, over, I think, probably 17 farms. These farms were, equivalent to the size of Lesotho. Just one person owned that much. They didn't work for it. They didn't go to war for it. They didn't, you know, do much, or they didn't do anything for it, but they were beneficiaries to that vast land. And then you flip the coin, and rightfully, like you said, you showed a picture of 2 hearts, you know, probably and most likely that land that, the 2 hearts occupy is the owner doesn't have the title deeds to that place. You know, it's under the chief, and the chief just cuts you a portion. You don't know when they will decide, they've had enough of you. You should be able to move or, relocate. Another classic example is what is happening, in Harare. We were talking about the rural. Let's go into the urban areas. Over 22,000 houses, residential stands, residential houses that have already been built are set to be bulldozed down. Who is to benefit from the land except, the citizens themselves? If the citizens cannot even now build a house within just a small yard, forget about an acre, a small yard, 300 by 300 square meters, and they are not safe, then can we truly say that there was a land reform program in Zimbabwe that benefited Zimbabweans? The answer is no. This was just a political, act to try and hush, the top brass or those loyal to Zanu PF who were now, restless. And it was never about the citizens whatsoever. And it's sad. Here is a man, you can see, he doesn't really own anything. If he had something going on for him, he wouldn't be, in this type of shape and form. This is somebody that is just moving from, pillar to post, waiting for Zanu PF handouts. They would have been better off if, like you said, they had title deeds to some portion of land. They could use it to get, loans and try and uplift themselves from poverty. But Zanu PF has made sure that you are always dependent on them, and that you do not spread your wings and fly, lest you fly for good. This is why Zanu PF has refused the citizens of Zimbabwe ownership to the land and land that belongs to them.
The other issue that is of serious concern is this issue of compensation. The Mnangagwa regime has agreed to pay the white farmers 3.5 billion US dollars. I think it should be clarified here that when most, if not all of these farms were seized from the whites, they were told they could only live with the clothes and there may be a few other things that they could take with them. If it was a commercial farm for cattle, they were told they could not take away the cattle or sell them. If there was crops, in some cases, the regime waited for them to harvest the crops and then put them out. They didn't even benefit from selling the crops that they'd harvested. And all the other improvements that the white farmers would have done on that farm, be it building dams, barns, etc., they were not to benefit from any of it. And so the compensation is not so much for the land, but for the improvements or the assets, the movable assets that these white commercial farmers were forced to leave behind. If the truth be told, most of these people who got the farms inherited all those assets and did not pay a single penny for them. And some of those people are still on those farms. The ordinary Zimbabwean, the ordinary taxpayer, who is now being asked to pay the compensation, the 3.5 billion US dollars is coming from the taxpayers, did not benefit anything from this. This is a regime that benefited from the looting of the white commercial farmers, and maybe out of guilt is realizing, okay, we need to compensate them. And then it's turning around to the taxpayer to pay the compensation. It is an outrage. Why is it that people like Mnangagwa, who walked into a farm like this, got all the crops that were on it, all the improvements that were on it, the big house, everything, are not being asked to pay a single penny to contribute towards compensating the original farm owner? And yet the ordinary Zimbabwean who got nothing from the seized farms is now being asked to pay. There is no doubt that in Zimbabwe, the issue of the land is a big issue. The way it was handled has created a lot of injustices. And many of them are still outstanding and they need to be addressed. And one can only hope that we'll be able to address the undermining political issues that has allowed people like Mnangagwa to stay in power, to rig elections and stay in power. Because as long as people like him have got the carte blanche power to rig elections and stay in power, I don't think we'll ever address the land issue and many other issues adequately and get them properly settled. Ben, give your closing remarks.
Now, in closing, I think, you just touched on a very, very, interesting and sad truth to say, the whole of this transaction that happened with the whole land reform program, you find out that the ordinary Zimbabwe, whether in the rural areas and in the urban areas, they have not benefited anything from the so-called land reform or land grab. Just a faithful few within Zanu PF managed to hoard all the land for themselves and all the prime land with, well-established, properties and equipment in there. They hoarded everything for themselves. And unfortunately, the ordinary Zimbabwean lost out in the transaction. And the unfortunate and the most, disrespectful thing is now that Zanu PF expects, the ordinary poor Zimbabwe to pay for what they got, for what they benefited themselves only. That is harsh. So the answer to, was there a real land reform program in Zimbabwe? The answer is no. There is no land reform program that benefited the citizens of Zimbabwe. It benefited just Zanu PF, period.
Thank you, Ben. I'll just answer a question from March 11 there. And he's saying, does the reimbursement for the improvements of seized farmland require an act of parliament to be legal? Well, I don't know. I cannot comment on that, but I'm sure if it does, Parliament can easily pass that bill. And in this particular case, the big issue, like I said in my remark, is, in my view, the very fact that the people who actually benefited from those improvements that were put on the farms are not being asked to pay anything. It's rather the taxpayer who is being asked to fork out. This is actually a recurring problem. Like I said earlier on, that during Mugabe's time, a lot of the ruling elite who got farms got very generous loans from the Reserve Bank to buy equipment, supposedly to help them with their farming. Those who did repay those loans paid them in Zimbabwe dollars at such ridiculous exchange rates, it was laughable. And men never even paid those loans. So it became another looting scheme. And that money has all disappeared to the ruling elite. And so this white farmer compensation is yet another scheme where the ruling elite benefit and the ordinary people do not. And that is the point that I would like to emphasize there. Thank you very much, Ben. And those of you who were able to join us, thank you very much for joining us today. Hope you'll be able to do it again tomorrow, same time, 7 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwean time. Well, when we will be trying to discuss one of another issue concerning Zimbabwe or Africa in general. Good night.